You guys in the rich countries taught us about, you invented capitalism, invented market. Why aren't you applying market forces to carbon? Why? And that is the question, because the problem now is that people make promises. Oh, you know, those poor guys in Africa and somewhere else, they have a problem there. Okay, well, we are kind people, you know. We're going to offer them some money. How about $100 billion for climate fight? But then, actually, things are tight. Oh, sorry, we cannot make it this year. Well, in those guys' mind, it's charity. It's charity. And that's a mistake. It should not be charity. This should be an international clear agreement. You break it, you own it. That is the honest answer. Without changing the market dynamic, will not change. Now, every American, man, woman, child, emits 17 tons every year. Every European, 6.5 to 7 tons a year. China, same. Now, the question here, excuse me, who gave you the right to use all this amount of carbon? We are 8 billion people in this planet. Science tells us we cannot emit more than 24 billion tons a year. That's 3 tons per head. 3 tons per head. Who gave the Americans the right to do 17? Who gave the Europeans the right to do 7? Why? You pay for it. If you pay for it, then you change. Then you cannot change behavior unless you pay for it. President Juncker, who is the president of the European Union a few years ago, said something very beautiful, actually. He said, you know what? All of us politicians, we know what to do. But we don't know how to get elected if we do it. And that is a problem. That is a problem. We have a lot of politicians want to be elected, but nothing will happen then. So nothing happens. So we must fight for carbon tax. I love what the Deputy Prime Minister said about that. And the first time I hear a senior European politician say that. Look, soon there's going to be a seat available for the Prime Minister in your country. I hope you get it. Anyway, because that's honorable of you to say that. Those guys are in denial. Who puts all this carbon up there? Who put it up? Own it. You need to own what you break something, you do it. That's the first point. Without carbon tax, everything else is charity. It doesn't work. That's one thing. Second thing, we talk about investment in Africa and green investment. We have been talking about investment in Africa for ages, but nobody invests in Africa. Trickle. Simple reason, it is impossible to invest in Africa. If all this rating agency rate you guys as junk, you are sub-grade investment. Who is going to invest here? Most of the money out there, private money, is in pension funds, insurance companies. By law, they cannot invest here. By law. If I'm running an insurance company and I want to put $1 billion, and a lot of those people are nice people, they want to invest in Africa, but they say, look, if I invest $1 billion, I have to put another $1 billion here as a security, because I'm sorry, but you are sub-grade. You are not investable grade for me. This system is broken. It has to be sorted out. And this rating agency, they all have one office in South Africa, as if South Africa is Africa, 54 countries. They sit in South Africa and pontificate about all of Africa. I'm amazed about the lack of governance in the World Bank and the IMF. And you know, I told Ajay and Kristalina the other day, we were all in Paris for a meeting. I said, you guys, if you were running or your banks are listed in any decent stock exchange, you will have been delisted because your governance sucks. Can you have a listed company? Can you have any bank in the world without senior independent directors? Where are the independent directors in the World Bank? None. It's the shareholders who, major shareholders, hug it. Where is the independent directors? Where is the voice of the other countries? Fine, major shareholders keep 60%, 70% of the shares. Fine, but let some fresh air in the room. Get some independent directors in the room. Otherwise, your governance sucks. You'll be delisted. Something else gross really happening in this institution. Do you know that this is the only banks in the world where the board sits in the headquarters? They sit in the headquarters with their staff. And I asked Ajay, how you run your business? You are the president of this institution and you have this board and their staff living on top of you, running around, telling the staff what to do, lobbying for their countries, whatever interest. No, 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 don't give loan to this guy. Hey, you must give that. What is this? This is breach of basics of good governance. Do you know how much it costs the World Bank to keep those guys in residence? Every year, it is over $100 million. Do you know that? $100 million to house the board and their staff every year. Excuse me, what is the job of the World Bank? To eradicate poverty? $100 million every year would have educated 1 million kids in Egypt every year. Why those guys sit there spending 100 million? This is the issue of governance. It has to be addressed. I'll stop here.
We have an increase of the debts with very high interest rates that do not allow that within our country we can have the necessary resources to invest in these proposals for energy transition and actions for mitigation and adaptation to the climate change. This will not change if we continue with the current financial system, as I have said, which has a colonialist point of view. The financial system, the international financial system that we have today is one that does not allow justice, social justice, and neither does it allow for climatic justice. In our countries, the basic needs are not satisfied. So, and there are lots of needs. We are one of the countries where there are the most inequalities in the planet. Sometimes we have to not invest socially in drinking water, in health, in electricity, and connectivity in order to use these resources from the treasury to pay the external debts, which, as I was telling you, has very high interest rates with respect to countries which do not have the same conditions that we have. In this sense, we have spoken about exchange of debt for climate action with new rules, not the same traditional rules, because this problem, which is not a traditional way of carrying out things, we have to innovate with new actions, new rules. The financial system today does not help us to face the challenges of climate change. It's not a system that was created for us, and it's not a just system for our countries. And in this sense, we have come to present a multilateral agreement because this is already a global crisis that requires a global response. And that means that, as we had done during the pandemic, we can do, or maybe in this multilateral agreement, we can do what was done during the pandemic to issue special rights that can allow the vulnerable countries and the middle-income countries to generate conditions of flexibility in regard to their debts and to free resources to invest in our lands, in our communities, in our nations. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible to care for this situation. This is a proposal which President Gustavo Petro has presented to the world, and we agree with President Ruto about the need to reform the financial system, the qualifiers of debt increase the crisis, because in a catastrophic situation of our country, the risk rating makes it more difficult to access to credit, which allows us to finance these programs. Therefore, we are in a situation of inequality, and which has some effects that are higher than those of other countries that are in better economic conditions. And this implies that we have to think that Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa should unite with one voice and to present in a very specific way what we have been doing to reform the financial system so that our countries we can access to better conditions of social and climatic justice.
The situation of Africa is well known. The challenges faced by the continent are known. And the expectations that are nurtured are known. Its important potential also is known. The promises made to Africa are also known. There is a lot of literature on this matter. Now, what should we do? This is the question. First, we have to accept the specific nature of the continent. 600 million Africans don't even have electricity. It is a continent which is under-industrialized, and then is being asked here and now to bring about ecological transition. President Macky Sall earlier was saying that we need to follow the rhythm and peculiarity of this continent. All this can be possible. Transition, yes, it is important, but we need to establish the necessary conditions for it to become possible. Africa is not coming empty-handed. It is a reservoir. So I think we need to think of that, how this important potential may be harnessed for the benefit of its peoples. This is a substantive issue. The promises that have been made, including the reform of international financial institutions. That is why we expect, and from this important conference, and it is very timely, so that around the table with our partners, with the financial institutions, with international organizations and the member states, since the challenge of climate change does not forgive anybody, does not distinguish between African, American, or Indian. I think we are all in the same boat. Let us make sure that this boat doesn't sink. That is the real problem. I'm not a technical expert to go into the various labyrinth of how to market carbon, etc. and all. I think we cannot be just content with promises. Those that have been promises made have never been fulfilled, have never been honored. Let us ask ourselves the real question, and honestly, whether politically we have decided this time to be serious and to be consistent. Thank you.
We know what success looks like. The big question remains political leadership, political will. And this is where differentiation lies in, because some countries will have to do more and others will have to do less. And some might lie in between. Let me just detail this. We know we need to stand for climate justice. And this needs to be detailed in a more meaningful way so that it makes sense to all, that also general audiences in Western Europe or OECD countries actually figure this out from a relative vantage of an advanced economy. We need to consider equity and urgency. Now, I'm very seized with the notion of opportunity because I think it's very big, it's equally important, and it's the only way we can drive this agenda away from being only an existentialist crisis and to keep people along with this flow. Now, the how, that's the what. The how is straightforward, technical support, but it differs per country. It can be high-level technical support, but it needs to be quick, it needs to be available, and it needs to be affordable. And very often it's still costed by the countries themselves. Here we need to fix that. Equally so, I think we've lost a lot of time in focusing too much in a lot of agendas on mitigation as opposed to adaptation. We now know both need to happen, but we need to make up for lost time. When it comes to finance, of course, very often the elephant in the room. I've been a minister for trade and aid. I've worked a long time for the UN. The best ideas fall foul of lack of political will, or affordability and finance. The substance most can agree to. Now, on the MDBs, we really think as shareholders and as partners in this endeavor, the reforms, the capital adequacy framework reforms need to happen now. There's an institutional burden of proof and leadership at the MDBs, as well as the IFIs, as well as the shareholders. I think President Ritu said that as well. We're all in this. We own part of it. We need to make this happen. We also see potential in differentiated pricing, in hybrid capital. It's only a pilot, but let's make the pilots work and scale them up. Too much time is lost in talking about pilots that remain standalone pilots. Secondly, private sector. I've heard a lot in recent years on how the private sector is willing, and I'm fully convinced, yet they need very often the right governance framework, they need to know which partnership they are part of, and they need scalable and callable projects where governments, such as mine, can guarantee the risks. The onus should not be on the developing or highly indebted country to also guarantee the risk. This is where I think we sometimes fail to connect the dots. Now, last but not least, governments. We need to really make serious business out of onward lending of the SDRs. We also need to increase the SDRs. We need to provide the additional finance. Now, as a Minister of Finance, of course, my other hat, I'll tell you, this is not a very popular theme. Everybody nods, yes, very important. No, we agree with Mrs. Kaag. But then it's either cost cutting or it's increase of taxation or other means of financial availability. And this is where domestic audiences suddenly become reticent. This is where political will comes in to make this a shared agenda for all of us. It's not easy. It can be done. We actually won elections on this ticket in the Netherlands last time round. I don't think we'll do as well this time, but still, it can be done. Innovation, an obvious one. Blended finance mentioned. Green bonds. We were the first AAA rated country that issued green bonds. We can assist other countries, but we also need to find ways for many of the developing countries to issue their own green bonds to also provide for the domestic resource mobilization that needs to happen as part of accountability. The sensitive topic of loss and damage, I look forward to the discussion at the COP28 because I think there's a fair claim that has been put forward. Now the negotiations will see how far we'll go. I think the political symbolism of the discussion is equally important if we talk about equity and a shared agenda. Now last but not least, carbon tax and carbon pricing. Very, very important. Unless you price it, unless you tax it, it often has little meaning. The only way to change behavior, productivity, the way we produce and consume, particularly at the large emitting countries, if we price it more and we make that part of a global public good. But that's part of a discussion. Last but not least, together with my friend and colleague, Minister of Finance of Indonesia, I co-chair the Global Coalition of Ministers of Finance for Climate Action. So a 1-second pitch, all ministers of finance, if not in the room, join this coalition. Make your budgets work for climate action. This is where the duty and opportunity of care lies. Thank you very much.
While we appreciate the contribution of our multilateral development institutions, the current financial architecture to support our progress, what they are doing is good, but it is insufficient because our current challenges are compounded. We're not dealing with a normal situation. We're not dealing with the situation for which these institutions were built. And therefore, it is important for us to realign our sources of financing with the realities of the moment. The moment we need a scale-up of development resources. And that is why we are speaking about scale. At the moment, we need to make sure that these resources are available at rates that are friendly to the investments we want to make. And therefore, in my very honest opinion, the reform of the multilateral development banks will achieve two things. And when we talk about reform of multilateral development banks, some of those banks, whether it is IMF or World Bank, we are shareholders. So legitimately, these are our institutions. And therefore, we need to deal with how do we make these institutions of ours much more fit for purpose? How do we make them fit for purpose? So, number one, we think like we did with COVID, when there was some creativity and innovation that resulted in special drawing rights. We think that there is scope in that window of special drawing rights to meet the challenges that we have of the moment of energy transition. What we would want done differently this time is that the manner in which these resources are allocated should be different, where those who need it most get it, while those who need it least don't have to get a lion's share of what they don't need. I think the other option that we need to have a conversation about is carbon tax. This is a very controversial thing, but it is the right thing to have the conversation about. However controversial it may be, we need to have a conversation about carbon tax. If we are to raise the scale of resources needed for energy transition, we must have a conversation about carbon tax. In fact, the numbers speak to it. The IMF has actually done a lot of work around it. And they have told us it is possible to raise 870 billion shillings from carbon tax. The only problem that IMF is pointing to us is that there is insufficient political will. And there are challenges with political will. Surely, faced with an existential threat to humanity, aren't we able to master the political will to achieve this? And let me give one more thought around it. the EU Parliament has already considered FTT, the financial transaction tax, as a means of raising resources to deal with climate change. And in fact, they've gone all the way to their parliament. So the idea of a carbon tax is no longer remote. We must have it firmly on the table. And 9 countries have already gone off the cliff. Many are on the way there to debt distress because of high interest rates and because of climate change. Unless we deal with it, and let us not imagine that we are sorted, especially because when we were in Paris, admittedly, there were found ways of dealing with countries that have been already in default. But the question we ask ourselves, do we have to wait until countries have gone to default to sort them out? Isn't it possible for us to sort them out ahead of the cliff? And that is the conversation we are having. And let me conclude by saying that this time round, we're going to be firmly on the table. It doesn't matter how uncomfortable this conversation is. It doesn't matter who we annoy. We are going to be here until we are heard and until the right thing happens. In this debate, there are no sides. We are on the same side. And we need to begin to drive this from the same side, because the risk that we face when this place burns, it will burn with everybody. The emitters and the non-emitters, the people from the south and the people from the north. That is settled. And because of that, we need to listen very carefully to what Mo Ibrahim is saying. We need to listen very carefully to what Mo Ibrahim is saying. Whether it is carbon tax, and I believe that conversation is overdue. If we will not be having a conversation about carbon tax in COP27, and not just that conversation, on the mechanism of the how, and with a proper timeline, then we will not have a meaningful conversation. Number 2 is the conversation around rating agencies. Credit rating agencies are destroying our economies. We have to be honest with them. Their algorithm is faulty. They are not using empirical science. And I'm saying this as a scientist myself. There is a problem, a big problem with credit rating agencies. And in some instances, they are conflicted. And there must be a candid conversation about their data, their findings, and whether they are doing the right thing. And finally, is to say, as Africa, we will be putting together the Nairobi Declaration that is going to be candid, bold, and practical for us to carry that conversation into the UN General Assembly and into COP28.